Hello and welcome back to the Student Midwife Notes podcast. It's been a while since I've made one of these episodes, so I really appreciate everyone who's listened to the episodes I've already produced. They've got loads of listens and it's really positive to see that so many of you found them helpful. Today's episode, I'm going to focus on talking about writing personal statements, and I'll chat a little bit about interviews as well. And this is for prospective student midwives. So not jobs, like midwifery jobs after studying, but to get onto a midwifery course. If you follow me on Instagram, you would have already seen that I was making this podcast, and I asked a few of you to ask me some questions to put in at the end of this video, which I have done. So I'll be answering your questions at the end of the video if you submitted them on Instagram. So let's start from the very basics. Before you even start your personal statement, you need to have done plenty of research, specifically into the role of the midwife and what being a midwife really entails. The main thing that midwifery tutors are going to be looking for in your personal statement is that you fully understand what it is that midwives do and that you are aware of that and it excites you, and that's exactly what you want to be doing. You need to put across your knowledge of the job and your passion and enthusiasm to, be part of that. For me, most of this research took place on Google and at university open days. So I attended lots of open days before I even started to apply to midwifery, just to check that it was something I was interested in and that it was sort of the course for me. The tutors at interview gave us lots of really good advice as to what they're looking for, and you just have to listen and take notes when they're speaking, and then they'll be giving you the answers that they want in your personal statement. You just have to be really listening to them and taking it in. I also joined the secret community, I think it's called that, for Midwives in the Making on Facebook. It was, at the time, this was a few years ago now, like a good 4 or 5 years ago now, when I joined it. It was a smaller group and it was very focused on, getting into university and starting university. It's evolved now into a bit of a different type of group, but there are still pockets and little gems of information that you can find on there relating to applying to midwifery, so I would recommend joining that. But these days, as the online community of midwives has grown, it is actually a lot easier to sort of see what it's like to be a midwife. Some of that information you can now gain on social media platforms, Instagram, YouTube, blogs. So I would recommend following people like myself, just a shameless plug here on Instagram, Student Midwife Notes, if you didn't know already. And there's so many students and midwives who make Instagram accounts solely dedicated to their work now, which is really, really helpful to see what it is really like to be a midwife. So it can give you an idea of, is this the job for me? And, it can give you a more realistic approach, because a lot of the time it's less filtered than if, you looked at an open day prospectus, because they're going to give you all the good things. Sometimes it's not all that great, but you need that realistic idea. And the admissions tutors will be looking to see, do you have a realistic idea of what it really is like to be a midwife? A note on the back of, social media midwives. I get a lot of DMs, and I know a lot of the other girls do, asking for specific help with your personal statement. Although I do recommend following these accounts to get an idea of what it is to be a midwife, this point sort of tells into the next thing. This is your personal statement. Asking for advice is very, very helpful, but I would keep it to, 1 or 2 trusted people who can help you with your personal statement and also give you really good focused advice that's relevant to you. I can't write your personal statement for you. I can do this podcast and give you, the generic tips and tricks, but I will not be able to give you any specific information, that will help with your personal statement, because you've got to, do that yourself at the end of the day, and that's what makes it personal, and that's what will make it stand out to the admissions tutors. I don't say that to be rude, don't DM me asking for personal statement help, but, there's only so much you can say. The best thing to do with the personal statement is find the information yourself. The information is out there, and then apply it to, your own personal life. So I'm going to give you that information here in this podcast. So reading, again, is really, really important. Some of the key things that they'll be looking for at interview and within your personal statement is that you've read the key texts, which we sort of have to know about as midwives. So the 6 C's, you can Google them. I want to say them now, but I'll probably forget them. But it's care, compassion, commitment, courage. I always forget the last ones. But you know what ones I mean, and they're online for you to look at. The NMC code is a really important document. Obviously, it's what we have to all abide by as midwives and nurses, so you need to know about that. And I would also recommend reading the Better Births report, but I'd recommend reading the summary because you've not even started yet. You don't need to read that big document. You probably won't be able to understand all of it just yet. But have an idea of what Better Births is and maybe some other case reports which are relevant to midwifery. You can just Google those and find out what they are. But just read them so you can get sort of a well-rounded understanding of what is involved in midwifery. So doing a few drafts is also really important. So the first time you write your personal statement, that will not be the thing that you submit to UCAS. You, as I said before, choose 1 or 2 trusted people to proofread your personal statement and give you honest feedback and advice. I recommend limiting it because, lots of different people's opinions can make things jumbled up and confused. And you want that person who you ask to really know you, know who you are, because then they can see whether or not it's a true reflection of who you are. For me, the people that read mine was one of the teachers at my school, because I wrote mine when I was at school, and then my mum also read it. So I felt like they were able to make really appropriate suggestions for me. So I've just got a couple do's and don'ts. So that was one do. Do write drafts. So this is a really important don't. And if you mention these in your personal statement, I know probably 99% of admissions tutors will just decline your application straight away because it shows that you don't actually understand what it's like to be a midwife. So don't reference any TV shows like One Born Every Minute, or even call the midwife as a reference for your interest. So just avoid that altogether. That might be the reason why you first became interested in midwifery, because I know for me, I saw a documentary and there was a midwife on it, and I was genuinely, after that point, interested in what midwifery is. But I did not mention that in my personal statement because you have to show that you've done the reading of the whole role. You can't learn about what a midwife is within, a short documentary or watching One Born Every Minute, because it's not about midwifery, these shows. They might introduce an aspect of midwifery, but it's so much broader. So avoid mentioning that because it will just look like your knowledge isn't that deep, Also avoid listing things. I feel like I'm talking in a list now with this podcast. But listing things just sort of shows surface level knowledge, and just you want to always give examples to your things that you're referencing. So you might say, I'm really passionate about midwifery. I like caring for women, or I like caring for people. That's fine, but anyone could have said that. You want to show examples, say, I like caring for people, I've been a volunteer at a local care home, or, an example like that, something that you've had experience with that shows that you're like a caring person, that you enjoy caring, rather than just saying that you do. Always give an example. And try and make your statement flow as well as you can. So that helps you sort of get out of the listing, make it flow, bring your points in to one another. Although it's not essential at this point, you want to show some of your writing ability. They'll obviously expect you to progress as you go through uni. They're not expecting you to write university level essays just yet, but they want to have an idea of your writing potential, because at the end of the day, they want a student to come to their university who can write them good essays. So write in a logical structure and this will also help you stick to your character count. If you're applying through UCAS, which obviously everyone in the UK is, sorry if you're not from the UK, this probably won't be as helpful for you. You have 4,000 characters, I think, if I remember correctly. That really isn't a lot of words for the amount of information that you're going to want to pack into there. So having a clear structure will help you stick to that character count and will mean that you don't really miss anything out. So I think I've sort of gone over the basics, the do's and don'ts. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal statement while sort of referencing the key things which I thought were really important when I included. So my personal statement, I got a lot of help from my school, which was great. And if you're having a gap year, I would still recommend, if you know you're going to take a year out, still write your personal statement whilst you're at school. You can add things to it or tweak it a little bit after you've maybe taken a year out. But get the initial help from your school, because they know what they're talking about when it comes to UCAS. And they give you so much great help. I assume they do. My school did. So take all of the help you can whilst you're still, in school or in college, even if you're going to take a year out, because they're the experts in it. So in order to write my personal statement, I read Ellie Durant's book. I think it's Becoming a Midwife or something like that. And then one other midwifery book with a similar title. I can't remember what they are. I don't have them anymore. I donated them to my school. But yeah, any books about, becoming a midwife, writing personal statements, that is a really, really good book to read. Obviously, I read the 6 C's, the Code, Better Births, and I made sure that I understood the role of the midwife. So in my first sort of paragraph, I made sure that I displayed that. So yeah, I started strong and I made sure that I identified that I knew that what the role of the midwife is, and that it's like a holistic, wide role within the community. And I sort of hoped to have like a good opening statement. A lot of admission tutors will say, although it's true, like putting in there, I know that midwife means with woman. Everyone knows that. That's a bit of a basic thing to do. So try and avoid that. A lot of people put that in their first sentence. You can reword it and work around it. And instead of just, like I said before, instead of just saying it, show it and show your understanding is that a midwife is with women. And one good way to avoid that is to avoid talking about babies too much. Looking after babies when they're born is a teeny role of the midwife. It's very, very short. And actually, midwife does mean with women. So you need to show that you understand that and that your role is, antenatal, intrapartum, postpartum, and, wider public health role rather than like looking after babies, because that really isn't what your role is. So after I outlined that I knew what the role of the midwife was, I went on to talk about my academic experience, my choice of A-levels, why they were relevant. And then in my second personal statement, so if you don't know, I did 2 personal statements. I applied for midwifery whilst I was at school, and then again after I took a year at university studying biomed. So I then, in my second personal statement, I spoke about my experiences in biomed. And yeah, I spoke about why they're relevant. So I said, I chose biology because I wanted to learn about the human body. This will be relevant. So I know, anatomy and physiology. I can't even remember. Oh yeah, and then I spoke about geography, and I was like, we learn about human geography, interactions, and I don't really remember that much, but I remember that's how I sort of linked it, about like human geography and learning about people and their choices and a lot of statistics. I also did physics. I don't really remember how I linked that, but if you know me, you know that my relationship with physics is a little bit broken at the moment because I didn't do very well with it. So yeah, after I spoke about the academic stuff, I sort of got that out of the way because it's not really the most important, because everyone has to go through academics in order to get to midwifery. And that's already outlined on their admissions sort of thing, like the entry requirements. You have to do X, Y, and Z to meet the criteria. So you shouldn't talk too much about those unless there's specific aspects of it which are relevant to midwifery, which I'll talk about mine in a second. But then after that, I went to talk about sort of my extracurriculars, which I did a lot of. Looking back now, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how did I even do that? But that's probably why I didn't do so well in my levels. But it's important to do extracurriculars and focus on your academic work. Please do that. That's my one piece of advice. Just actually revise for your A-levels, please. So yeah, out of compulsory schoolwork, I did a lot within school. So I was involved in student leadership. I was the head girl of my school. So that was a lot of responsibility. And I linked that to having, responsibility as a midwife. I did loads of other volunteering as well. So I gave reading support in a primary school. So I went and the children read to me. It was very boring, but it looked good in a personal statement. I also supported some GCSE students in their exams. So the students which needed help with their reading and writing, I did that for them, and they sort of told me their answers. So helped them do their exams. And then I also mentored a GCSE student. So I linked all of this into being able to, juggle academic work and other responsibilities and being responsible and supporting younger students, which obviously all of that is involved in the role of the midwife. So I was able to link that quite nicely. And I believe that looked quite good on my personal statement. I also did volunteering on the weekends. So I next brought that down. So I volunteered in a Sunday school with children, I had responsibility there looking after adults and children. And I've done that for a very, very long time. And then I went on to my actual work. So I worked in a care home on the weekends, and I spoke about, this was my healthcare experience. It's not necessary to have healthcare experience, but it definitely does help. And honestly, I do believe that having that experience in the care home really did help me when I was introduced to midwifery. Just like the random little things, like I knew what a sluice was. Everything didn't sound so alien because I'd worked in this care home. And I also, linked it to being able to build a rapport with clients and do tasks which are care focused. And also in this time, I was able to work alongside another student midwife. And so she gave me a nice, realistic sort of explanation as to what the role of the midwife really is. She gave me lots of advice on my statement. So this also looked good on my personal statement, because it's so hard to get real midwifery experience, so hard to go into a hospital and actually get any type of experience. It's very, very rare to get some. So this experience for me was like a gold mine. I was in contact with someone who was a student midwife, and I was working in a care environment. I wasn't doing any midwifery, but just being able to talk to someone about it gave me a great insight and something good to put on my personal statement that would show admissions tutors, yeah, I did actually have a good idea of what the role of the midwife is, and I still want to do it. Yeah, so I just kept saying that, speaking to this midwife, further, it gave me the enthusiasm to want to apply to midwifery. I kept reinforcing the fact that I want to be a midwife. I think I would be a good midwife because of X, Y, and Z, because I'm good at taking responsibility, because I can make a good rapport with clients, because I'm caring, because I understand that being a midwife is being with women. And then I thought it was important to reference in my personal statement, the realistic pressures of the NHS. So I did that. And I made sure that, I put a positive spin on it, because, working in the NHS, you're so aware of the restrictions and, funding and time pressures is a real big thing. But making sure that they're aware of that in your personal statement is a really good thing. But I linked that also into, you don't just care for your women, you care for your colleagues and for yourself. And then I spoke about sort of like some of my hobbies and things I like to do in my downtime. And I also spoke about being a team player. In my second personal statement, I was able to talk about being a cheerleader, because that was something I did when I was at university for that first year before I did midwifery. And obviously involves a lot of teamwork and working with women and building each other up and helping each other and working together. So I was able to really link that into, teamwork and supporting people. And, you're in a high pressure environment when you're doing a cheer competition. If you don't know a lot about cheer, it's not just waving pom-poms about. The type of cheer I did was strong exercise, going for a long time, lifting people up, having to communicate really, really well. And throughout my statement, communication was a key thing that I displayed. The 6 C's, I don't know if that was one of them I mentioned when I tried to list them out, but communication is one of them and probably the most important. So you want to be showing, not necessarily mentioning the 6 C's as in, I know what the 6 C's are at a point in your personal statement, but putting each of those words in at some point in order to explain, your experience and say, this shows that I'm courageous, this shows that I'm compassionate. I know the importance of communication. Just placing it in little areas like that will look better and flow better than if you were to just say, these are the 6 C's, I think I have them, And sort of to close off, I spoke a little bit about my area of interest. You don't have to have an area of interest, but I thought it was good because at the time I did have one. I also spoke a little bit more about my A-level in biology now at the end, because I was involved in the start of a research project at my school. And I was able to go to like a conference about it and present about it, which, I thought showed my confidence. And, being involved in research is a really good thing as a midwife. But it also opened my eyes to an area of midwifery I didn't really know about. So one of the other schools presenting at this conference was talking about their research into GDM, so gestational diabetes. And after that conference, I did some more research on it about myself, and that sort of became my specialist area of interest at that time. So I referenced it in my personal statement. And, it opened my eyes to the more complex side of midwifery, and I was able to then reference that in my personal statement, that although pregnancy and birth is a nice and normal experience, and that where possible we should keep it as low risk and normal as possible, sometimes it's more complicated because women are very complicated people sometimes. So I just referenced the fact that, you're working with lots of different agencies in a multidisciplinary team rather than just midwives and women. Sometimes you require more than that. And my closing statement sort of referenced the variety of work that midwives undertake, and I tried to convey how much midwifery really excites me, and how, the fact that there's new stuff to learn always is really what makes me passionate about being a midwife. And that's just a real quick whistle-stop tour of what I included in my personal statement. Obviously, it will be different for everyone because it's a personal statement. But I'll just quickly run through the key points again, which I thought, you should really list in your personal statement. So the holistic role of the midwife and why you want to be a midwife. Speak about your academic experience. speak about, volunteering, any leadership or responsibilities which you've undertaken, being a caring person, and all of the 6 C's, so communication, compassion, courage, commitment, and whatever the other one is. Make sure you show that you know what a realistic idea of what midwives do. Understand that you'll be working in the NHS and show an understanding of what that is and what that entails. A little bit about teamwork, maybe talk about an area of interest if you have one. Talk about, the wider role of the midwife, public health, complex midwifery, multidisciplinary working, and, research and the fact that there's always new stuff to learn. You're a lifelong learner as a midwife. And then just try and convey your excitement. I remember reading my personal statement and I really think I sounded excited in it. And I always think I sound excited when I talk about midwifery. I feel like I sound excited now. And that is how I spoke at interview. I made sure to always smile and have so much enthusiasm with my answers, because you just want to convey your interest and enthusiasm, because you can easily get burnt out in midwifery. So you need to show the admissions tutors and, the lecturers, I love midwifery as much as I know about it now. Because when I look back, I probably didn't even know that much about midwifery, but I knew just enough to excite me. And I was lucky that the further along I went on the course, the more and more excited that I got. So you want to just show that that's the type of person you're going to be. Every aspect of midwifery excites you, but you also understand the tough challenges that you might face as a midwife. So yeah, that would be my advice for the personal statement at interview. I'm going to answer some of your questions now. A lot of the questions focus more about interviews, actually, which is good, because I didn't really speak a lot about that in here, but a lot of this applies to interview. You want to have the same knowledge at interview that you do in your personal statement. At interview, they just want to get your personality, basically, and see how you are talking and your confidence and stuff like that. So yeah, let's answer some of your questions. The first question I got was, is it essential to have healthcare/volunteering experience? That's a difficult question, because I don't know if I would say it is essential, because some people say, I didn't have any experience. But you do need to have some experience that is, transferable. They talk a lot about transferable skills. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I worked in a healthcare environment, I was an HCA, I was an MCA, or I volunteered somewhere to do with midwifery. It could be as simple as working in a shop, displaying what the transferable skills are you got from working in a shop, having responsibility, customer service, and things like that. It doesn't have to be specifically healthcare, but you have to have some life experience, basically. It's not enough to have just gone to school and decided you want to be a midwife, unfortunately. Although I'm not saying that if that's what's happened to you, you will not be a good midwife, but I really would recommend having some, more life experience first. It's important. You're going to be going into a job with loads and loads of responsibility, and you have to grow up a little bit quicker, basically. So yeah, it's not essential to have healthcare or volunteering experience, but life experience doing something that you can, take transferable skills in to show that midwifery is suited to you for it is sort of what you need. I don't know if that last sentence really made sense. So next question, how to cope if your brain goes blank at interview? My best advice for an interview is don't rush into answering the questions. When someone asks you a question, you can sit and think about it for a minute. You can say, okay, let me just think about that for a second. And really, curate your thoughts and think about your answer before giving it. There's no need to rush at an interview, but also obviously don't take loads of time, but there's no need to rush. So if they say, explain to me the role of a midwife, it's easy to just spurt out loads of different words that you've read, but, think of a well-curated answer that encompasses it all so you don't ramble too much. I know I'm a rambler, and you can probably tell when you listen to my podcast or watch my videos, I can go on and on and on and talk. But when I'm at an interview, I make sure that I take a minute to think about the question and then I speak, because otherwise you just come up with like a jumbled up mess. So yeah, that will probably help you if your mind is going blank. Just take a minute to think, organise your thoughts, and then give your answer. And if you don't know, you can always say, is there any way you can rephrase that for me? Or can you repeat the question? Or can you give me a hint? Because they understand that you're nervous, and sometimes, wording it slightly differently might help you. And I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. As long as you give them a decent answer afterwards, I'm sure they'll be absolutely fine with that. The next question, how to stand out above others at interview. I'm really struggling to shine. Confidence is a big thing. Being confident is obviously very, very important. But also an interview is a place where sometimes you don't feel quite so confident. You can feel quite nervous. I've spoken about this before, but power posing is something which I genuinely do and believe in. There's a TED talk on it, so you can Google that. But it's all about, changing the position that you're standing in, and it somehow gives you some confidence. Yeah, it genuinely works. I've done it before every interview I've ever taken, and I've pretty much always after doing power posing, I've always, got the job or got the place or anything. I genuinely believe in power posing. So do that. That standing out above others also is just, you're being watched at interview even when they're not asking you questions. So asking questions yourself and talking to, the other people who are looking to get onto the course, being friendly, smiling, being kind. I don't mean to be fake because you're being watched, but just be mindful that you are being watched and just be yourself. Being yourself is the best thing you can ever be. So don't overthink, how you're acting around others or what you're doing. Your personality will shine through if you just let it. Try and take away the nerves and just be yourself. Think about, what is it that makes you want to be a midwife, and get excited by it, because the topic of midwifery should excite you. And when you talk about something you're excited about, you should shine. So just try not to let your head get in your way, Someone said, how much should you mention your EPQ if it directly links to midwifery? I never did an EPQ, but obviously I did do that research project, so I did mention that. And I would definitely mention it in your personal statement. And if there's a question that it sort of comes up in an interview where you think, oh, that would be a really good time to reference that I did this, do it. You've only got 4,000 characters in your personal statement, so don't rewrite the EPQ basically. But do reference it if it's about midwifery, because obviously it shows that you've done some research or you have a good understanding of midwifery. So yeah, do mention it. But at interview, it's probably an even better chance to talk about it if it links to a question. I know when I interviewed for one of the universities, I mentioned that research project, which I did, and I spoke about that for a little bit of time, and they were really, really impressed by it. I could tell by the way they were asking me more and more questions about it. Another example of that being when I actually went for my actual midwife job interview, I spoke about my dissertation because it was relevant to one of the questions which was asked. Work that you've done, a lot of it is quite close to your heart. You're really proud of it. So yeah, talk about it if it's relevant. Someone said, how important is it to cover the 6 C's? Yeah, very important. But as I said before, don't just say, these are the 6 C's, I have them. Just make sure that they're spread out amongst your personal statement. Someone says, how to boost your personal statement when you don't have the best grades? I had terrible grades. So yeah, I just made sure that I conveyed my enthusiasm for midwifery basically and focused more on my volunteering experiences and my work experience and more of my personality and everything which I've done, which sort of displays that I would be a good midwife despite the fact that my grades were terrible at that time. How should I add about reading I've done about midwifery? Like I said, mention a specialist area of interest. You don't need to reference properly like Harvard referencing, because that will literally take up so much of your character count. But just sort of reference the things which you've read about. So the main things. So I said, GDM. Just talk about it a tiny bit. Again, something which maybe you can talk more in depth about at interview. Can I talk about a specific area of midwifery in detail? Leave that for interview. Okay, so I basically answered that question. Yeah, talk about it a little bit, but then if you have the chance, talk about it more at the interview, because it can be a nice discussion to have, and you can talk in more detail until you have more time for that. So someone said, what are some of the main questions asked at interview? This changes from place to place. One of the unis I applied for did mini multiple interviews, so we moved around the room and had a different question at each station, and one of them was a sit down face to face and stuff like that. So it depends on the university, but most of them will ask you, what's the role of a midwife? What's something you've read recently about midwifery? What are some of the other things? Scenario based questions, stuff like that. But it's just best, so thinking on your feet and not getting bogged down in revising for the interview is probably a good thing I would recommend. So don't just look up what common questions are. Revise broadly about, the role of the midwife and stuff like that. Because they'll probably give you a bit more complicated questions, but you'll need to draw out what they're actually asking you there. But don't get too worried about that. They just want to see how you think as well. Someone said, this is the last question, do I include statistics or quotes in my personal statement. You can do, but it's your personal statement at the end of the day. So using a quote from someone else is sort of detracting from your own thoughts and feelings. You know, they want to see your thoughts, your thought process, you know, all the things that you've done. So statistics and quotes probably not as relevant, unless, you know, you've done something that is relevant to that. But yeah, it's not really 100% necessary for that. So yeah, that was the last question. I hope that you found this episode helpful. Let me see how long it is. Oh, it's half an hour. Perfect. So I hope I haven't spoken too quickly or rambled on too much, and that you got something useful from this podcast episode. Let me just double check that I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. Yeah, I have. Actually, you know what? I missed out a really important thing. You know, the role of the midwife is advocating for women and being with women. So just make sure that you understand that and put that in there. I think I did say that maybe. But, you know, it's easy to forget that when you're writing, when you're talking about like everything that you're doing and why you'd be a good midwife. You just want to focus it back to what midwifery really, really is. So yeah, I hope you found this episode helpful. Please, you know, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Give us a rating, give us a like. Follow me on Instagram for more and to see what I get up to. Thanks for listening. Bye.